All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for attending this excellent science communication workshop. We are very grateful for you all for your submissions to our journal, and we hope that you will enjoy this experience learning how to communicate your work more effectively. And hopefully you get some great tips and tricks that you can use, not only for the pieces that you submitted to the journal, but also for your research that you do on your own time. And so I'm going to start this off by introducing our speaker for today, who will be running the entire workshop. And then we can get started. So Lisa Munoz has been hooked on science since she took a picture of a fly's eye with a scanning electron microscope when she was 14. Throughout her 20-year career as a science communicator, she has translated complex scientific topics into digestible stories for broad audiences. Lisa began her career as a radio producer, then worked as a magazine reporter and editor for GeoTimes magazine, served as a press officer for the World Meteorological Organization, and founded a science communications consulting firm in 2012. As a founder and president of SciComm Services, Inc., Lisa works with a variety of academic groups, nonprofits, and startups across the sciences on strategic communication and content development. She's also working on a book adaptation of the documentary film Picture a Scientist. She has an engineering degree from Cornell University with a specialization in science writing. And Lisa, we are so grateful for you joining us. And with that, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. And hi, everybody from wherever you're dialing in from. It's very nice to meet you. Again, my name is Lisa Munoz. It's great to be here to talk about my favorite topic, which is science communication. I'm going to dive into a short presentation in a little bit, but I did actually want to do a quick round of introductions, which I hope won't be too awkward without our cameras off. And then hopefully after the recording, when we turn our cameras back on, I can connect the voices and the names with the faces. But it would be great if we could just go around and if each of you could tell me who you are, where you work, where you're located, and what you're hoping to get out of this workshop. That would be great. And I'll just start at random on my screen, if that's okay, starting with Kaylee.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kaylee. I work at Northwestern University in the biomedical engineering department. My work is radiology based, and I'm really excited about this communication workshop because I find already that my research is so difficult to communicate to people. So I'm looking just for some tips and strategies to do that.
Great, thanks, Kaylee. Hui, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Please tell me how to say it correctly when you come on.
Yeah, my name is Wei, like W-A-Y, but not spelled like that. I also work at Northwestern University, but I work in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I'm an astronomer, and I study the deaths of very massive stars. I am, like Kaylee, hoping to be able to better explain my science, because sometimes people don't want to hear about the nitty-gritty math of astronomy.
Great, thanks, Wei. Andrew?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Crane. I'm at the University of Georgia. I work in the graduate school here, and my background is in higher education administration and policy. I study rural students. And yeah, similarly, I'm just interested in continuing to increase my communication skills. I study college access for rural students, and there's a lot of interest in that topic. So just want to make sure I'm communicating clearly and accurately when I put my research out there.
Great, thanks, Andrew. My parents are both UGA grads, and I'm from Atlanta, so. Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Ramirez. I am a PhD candidate in chemical engineering at Northwestern University. My research is in sort of a physical chemistry materials space. I work on studying organic materials for solar cell applications. And that's really what got me interested in policy anyway, was seeing where that research actually goes. And so I am interested in learning more today about how to maintain that connection between, you know, people who actually need the solutions that we're supposed to be working on in lab and the research that people like me are doing.
That's great. Thank you, Carolyn. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Woods Robinson, and I am at UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which where I am perched from at the moment. And I study also materials for solar cells, but I study inorganic materials. And I am interested kind of how to talk to scientists, like within science, how to talk about climate change and renewable energy. I think a lot of people feel, you know, that's not what I do, like, but I think there's a lot of ways that scientists can make choices that benefit the planet. So I'm learning how to do that. And then also I'm interested in ways to like how scientists interface with K-12 education and setting up programs that allow for scientists to go chat to kids and talk about science.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Vetri, am I saying your name right?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, great.
So I'm Vetri. I'm a PhD candidate in physics here, also at UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I'm probably a short walk away from Rachel at the moment. So I am an experimental particle physicist. So I look for, I try to understand the nature of dark matter. What I'm interested in here today, so Rachel and I were the ones, we're two of the authors of this paper on like STEM K through 12 outreach. And I guess I'm interested kind of on that vein, understanding like how to engage with the public overall. So how to make sure that like scientists have a presence and people understand like what the day of a scientist is like, and you know, like what types of stuff we do, because I feel like there's not that many representations in media, and the ones that exist aren't that good. So yeah.
That's great. I think that's, oh no, wait, do we have Rania? Sorry, you were hiding at the bottom of my screen.
Hi, sorry, no worries. Hi, I'm Rania. I am a PhD candidate at Northwestern, and my co-authors are also Kaylee and Wei. And I am specifically in the biomedical engineering department. And in terms of the research that I do, I try to use molecular models to better understand genome structure and function. And I think just kind of, I guess, general science communication goals, I see a lot that my research, I think, as is a lot of people's in this group, is very like abstract and complex. And I think like it's really important to be able to break it down for several different types of people, like including, you know, like the general public. And I think like really increasing access to that type of information is really important. One thing that me, Wei, and Kaylee's article was talking about is in terms of the language accessibility, in terms of if like international students are coming here, or also if there's like international publications that are happening that we don't have access to. So just decreasing that language barrier. But I think there's a lot of other types of things that need to be broken down as well.
Great, thank you, everyone. That was super helpful, especially to hear about.
I don't think I've gone yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. You were right in the middle of my screen. You moved. I think you were at the top before when your camera's on. Please, thank you. Go ahead, Jeremy.
On that note, what is the protocol with cameras this time and keeping them on, off?
I think the protocol is now that you can turn it on while you're speaking, if I understand correctly. So go for it.
Someone could turn it. The host should allow me to turn on then.
Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Is that working? Yeah. There
Yes. Hi, my name is Jeremy Pesner. I am coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Although I actually was at Georgia Tech for a year, and during that period, I went to the CommSciCon conference at UGA as well.
Oh, great.
I am a PhD student in engineering and public policy. My research has kind of shifted. I mean, it's been on like telecom. It's been on spectrum policy for wireless packets between cars. It might be moving more into sort of a data evaluation type of thing. I've written for the general public a number of times, and even from CommSciCon, I actually created a comic for talking about science policy. So I'm actually looking for like venues to publish sort of what we might call non-traditional communication sources. So generally speaking, I'm open to talking about SciComm strategies, how to explain topics well, and yeah, especially how to do so in ways that people, how to write, instead of writing yet another article that, 3 people might read, how to write something or create something that's a little more engaging and novel.
Great, thank you. Did I get to everybody? Let me double check myself that nobody else has joined. Okay, great. So I'm going to dive into this presentation. A couple of comments first on what you all said. I think we're gonna cover a lot of the basics of science communication in the context of your policy position papers for the purposes of this workshop, but a lot of it is very generalizable to your research and to your research interests. And so definitely, after I get through my presentation, when we have the question and discussion period, please come with any questions that you have. I'll try to get to as much as we can. And then we're going to have some pitching exercises and some writing exercises. And again, the focus of that will be your policy position papers. But if you want to shift your focus, especially for some of you who have co-authors, if there's something else that you're looking to get out of it, then please just let me know and modify the exercises to suit what you need. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So I have read all of your papers. I've given them all at least one read. And so I just wanted to first congratulate you all because you've already done a lot of heavy legwork, especially in reaching outside of potentially your major research areas, as I heard just now. And so welcome here. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about some science communication tools. I hope that you get a lot out of this. I am starting with some pretty basic stuff. It sounds like you guys don't need to be convinced of the value of science communications, but I'm going to start here anyways. So why do we communicate our research? Well, of course, within the policy sphere, we want to ultimately reach the policymakers or the people who can take action. And so we're going to talk more about what that means and who those people are. But we also want to gain public visibility. We want to gain public support. That's one way to ultimately reach policymakers. And I think I heard at least one of you talking about this. We want to be able to connect with new or unexpected collaborators. Those might be within the scientific community, but just maybe not within your immediate field. So there are a lot of more specific reasons why we communicate your research. I always like to throw into these presentations and workshops a little fun note that research that gets featured in media actually gets cited more often. So if one of your goals is just, advancing your career and wanting to sort of progress through that, being out there, communicating your work, talking to the press, talking to the public, it does help you toward achieving those goals. So again, as I mentioned, congratulations. You guys already took a huge first step by publishing your policy papers in JSPG. And I've seen that a lot of you have done some social media. A lot of you have done some work with your press office. I saw a piece in Northwestern. I know Jeremy said he's done a lot of writing. So it's great what you're already doing. I'm hoping to give you some additional tools today to figure out sort of what the next step is. And I know that it can feel overwhelming. You guys are all full-time researchers. You have a lot going on your plate and you're focused on your science. And so communication is sort of adjacent to that. Again, it's a very integral part of the scientific process because without sharing our work, we can't really use it as effectively in the world. But you might look out there and say, okay, there's Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the social media. And then people are talking about podcasts and blogs and how do I break it down? How do I figure out what to do? I put up some specific examples here, starting with from your own articles. There's this nice tweet that JSPG did about the paper about investing in graduate students. It was great because they tagged everybody. They linked to the article. They had some hashtags. There was a great thumbnail. I put up here an op-ed that Adriana did on building the future STEM workforce. This was on Medium, which is a good tool that we can talk about a little bit later if you're interested in blogging. I put up that Northwestern piece to show that you can work with your universities and your press officers to try to get stories and press coverage. And then I threw in something that's from outside of this group just to plant the seed. You can also write letters to the editor. in response to articles. This is a piece that I worked on with an immunologist a few years ago about vaccine development. So again, I'm just kind of putting out some examples to just get you thinking in that direction. So the question becomes, how do you figure out which of these directions to go? There are a couple of very basic first principles that might seem super obvious, but a lot of people don't go through this process and don't think about it. And so one of my goals today is to just give you a framework for thinking and a process that you can just go through each time you're thinking about presenting your work beyond your normal circles. So the very first big question is, who do you want to reach? And this might, again, seem obvious. Many of you might say, well, I just want to reach as many people as possible. And that's great, but I would encourage you to be very specific for each piece of communications work or outreach work, who you're defining your specific audience. So I put the audience, potential audience members in two categories here. The top row in blue is what I think of as a primary audience. So I'm guessing that for these policy position papers, your two primary audiences might be policymakers. This can be at the federal level, at the local level. There are lots of different groups within that you can more precisely define, and the general public. And this might be the policy general public, people who read op-eds in the New York Times, or it could be people who read Scientific American. So again, you can more precisely define that. And then there are secondary audiences. I call them secondary because these are people who you can target your communications to in order to reach your primary target. So these might be colleagues and collaborators. Those can be within the scientific community, or they can be outside of it. Maybe it's a think tank, maybe it's a nonprofit. And then of course the press are a very common secondary audience target, because when you talk to reporters, they can write it up to reach all of these specific audiences that you want to. So when you can precisely define who you want to reach, you can better figure out the outlets and the mechanism for doing that. The other really important question to ask early and often in this process is, what is your goal? Again, this might seem obvious. You might say, well, I just want to reach people with my work, which is great. But what will success look like to you? I put some examples up here. Is success an op-ed in the New York Times? Is success grant funding from NSF or NIH or wherever it is that you're looking to get funding from? Is success getting text added to a bill? Is it getting a connection with a local lawmaker? Is it connecting with a K-12 resource group or a think tank? These are all just examples, but the more precisely you can identify your goals and what success will look like, the better you're going to be able to target what you're doing to reach that goal. And so you're going to be much more efficient with your time and with what you're doing. So those are some like very basic first principle steps in thinking about the strategy. I'm going to move now into talking more about the mechanics of your pitch. Again, this is going to seem really basic, but we're going to start with journalism. The who, what, when, where, why, and how. When you're creating a pitch, which can be a pitch that you're giving in writing to an editor to try to get them to cover you or to try to get a story published, if you're trying to make an appearance on a podcast, if you want to have language on social media to attract attention, whatever that is, if you're trying to set up a meeting with a potential funder, you want to think about the basic elements of your pitch. And this applies whether it's anything, whether it's your science, your policy, anything. I took a really simple example here that's not from the policy world. It's a straight news story about taking mRNA technology, vaccine technology, and moving it to flu and other non-COVID viruses. And I just took a simple example of the who, what, when, where, how, and why. You guys can read this on your own. I think the tricky part when you're thinking about your policy papers might be the who. Are you the who? Is it that researchers are calling for this action to take place, you know, for multilingual translation of scientific articles? Or is it that you want a specific group to take action? I think making those decisions, thinking about how you want to frame the news that you're presenting, really helps you to think about, again, what your goals are and who you're trying to reach and how best to accomplish that. So these are very basic principles to start with, and then you can start layering on top of it. Stories, we talk a lot, I'm sure you guys have heard about narrative and stories and how to make an arc and how to make a compelling case. And so I put some examples up here of what I think is a piece that's weaker on story in terms of making your work relevant, and one that's stronger. And I quite intentionally picked examples that don't include like a classic anecdotal story. These are different types of stories. The one that's weak on story, this is in the World Economic Forum. It has a fairly generic title. I read through the first several bullets in the first couple paragraphs, and I still didn't see a specific reason, statistic, example, detail telling me why it was that the world needed to embrace open science. Contrast that with this op-ed on the right from the Washington Post, has a fairly provocative title, Why It's a Mistake to Teach Climate Change Only in Science Class. And she took one data point from a poll, the idea that only, what she thought was a surprisingly low number, that only 49% of students view climate change as a major threat. And she built an entire narrative arc around that. She built an entire case around one statistic. So again, that shows a way that you can create a compelling story, a compelling case for your work without even having to rely on personal anecdote. You still can, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So I heard a few of you talking about wanting to make connections, wanting to find ways, especially maybe for your scientific research that's a little bit more perhaps abstract for people to hang on to. There are a lot of different ways we can make connections. Again, for the purposes of this opening presentation, these are focused more on the policy side. So the first example from the Hill, a serious immigration problem you probably haven't heard about. I know that a few of you have heard about it. This very directly makes a case for why some of the immigration policies put in place related to COVID-19 might be inadvertently affecting the ability for postdocs to come and study and do their work in the United States. And so that was a very effective way to connect that issue to something happening in the policy world right now with an immigration, with immigration rules that the Biden administration has just put into place or has been discussing. There's another COVID-19 connection. Of course, there's a lot of that right now. Science alone can't heal a sick society. Even though it has the hook of COVID-19, it actually talks about a much broader set of issues in public health and public health policy. And then I included this last example as a contrast to the World Economic Forum one that I had listed as being a little bit weaker on story. This says open data can revolutionize the climate fight for vulnerable communities. And I picked it because you can see immediately, even just in the headline, how specific it is. So you see right away that the value in open data here is for developing communities to be able to take action against climate change. So again, this is very quick overview of some of these key topics. So we've gone through already the basic questions you need to ask, some of the types of story arcs or narratives tools that you can use. And then here I have just a summary of some of that when we're thinking about taking our abstracts or taking our current research summaries and transitioning them and converting them into pitches. So again, it's very, very, very important. I'm going to say this a lot, to think about who you're trying to reach. Who is your target? The hook we just talked about. Pull out an interesting detail, pull out an example, try to gain some interest really quickly. So that means not starting off with the broad and the generic, starting off with the specific. And then I put in this inverted pyramid picture, which maybe some of you have heard of before. So the idea is that you're starting with the most important information up top. You're putting those bottom line conclusions at the beginning, and then you're going increasingly to increasingly less important topics. This concept was developed in journalism from the days when newspaper columnists would literally be cut off by their editors. They could just snip the actual paper. And so the idea was you wanted to make sure that wherever they snipped it, people would still be left with the important stuff. And I like to talk about this with scientists in particular, because we're trained when we write research papers, traditionally, scientifically, to sort of gradually build our argument and to show a lot of background and context up front before getting to the conclusions. And this literally flips that on its head. No matter what you're doing, you want to be concise. You want to be clear. You want to be brief. This is, again, specific to the pitch. A pitch is not necessarily a place for nuance. You can be nuanced in your arguments, and I encourage you to be, especially when it comes to science. Not everything is clear cut, but save that for once your pitch has been accepted, once you've gotten that meeting, once you've gotten that opportunity to be on a podcast or to be published, once you've experimented with your language on social media and you want to do like a more in-depth thread. Again, we can talk a little bit more about this in the question and discussion. Once you have your pitch, I call it ABP, always be pitching. It's really important to practice your pitch, to practice talking about your work. This could mean practicing in front of a mirror, practicing on camera. You can also test out different messages on social media. I think it's a really underutilized tool for social media is just in experimenting with your language. They're sort of quick and cheap, and you put them out in the world and see which ones stick. It reminds me of this A/B testing that the New York Times does for their headlines. So for any given New York Times story, they might actually have 8 different headlines that depending on where you are, you see a different one, and they track which ones get the most engagement. You can do something like this with Twitter just by trying different things. And as you try things, you're able to then iterate, you're able to refine your pitch, you're able to get more comfortable with it, to see what sticks for people, what questions they ask, and how you can better address them up front. And then you just have to repeat it all over again. And I say repeat in 2 ways. One is that the more you practice, the more you repeat, the more you get comfortable with your pitch, the better it's going to be. But the second thing is that the more that you put it out into the world, the more people see it and have that repeat exposure, the more likely it is that something's going to come of it, that you're going to meet your goals, that people are going to remember you and your work, and that you're going to be able to take that next step and that next action toward meeting your goals. I have just this one final slide, and then I'm eager to get into your questions and discussion and stop talking so much myself, which is I just wanted to talk a little bit more about style. I gave a couple of examples earlier. I want to give some examples of other types of style. I pulled out 3 tweets here that represent, I think, different styles and different approaches that you can take to thinking and talking about your work, whether it's on social media or otherwise. The first, again, is this style that you know I already like, of taking out an interesting statistic and using it to spark conversation. So here it's 5 times as many police officers have died from COVID-19 as from gunfire since the start of the pandemic. That's a very compelling way to get into the topic of why get vaccinated? Why does this matter? What's the science behind it? I included here in the middle, this is a social psychologist. If you guys don't follow, he's great. He tweets a lot. And he has this ability to distill the main findings of a paper very easily in the context of a tweet. So this is from a Nature article about how harassing and trolling scientists has this very chilling effect on science communication. And he pulled out an interesting graphic and then just talked very clearly and concisely about it. And then the last one is a pretty different style that shows more of a personal connection to the research. And I thought it was very effective, this image of the empty shelf. No goldfish on the grocery shelves this morning. And for the first time in my life, my kids are interested in what I do for a living. And I became interested in what he did for a living. And I clicked on his profile and I found out that he studies supply chain. And so again, there are a lot of different ways you can talk about your work. And a lot of it is going to depend, again, on who you're trying to reach and what your goal is. And so these are very general principles, but I'm eager to help you all try to figure out how to best apply it to your own specific communication goals and to what you're trying to do. So with that, I'm going to take some questions, discussions. Please just jump in.
Sure, I'll start. I mean, I didn't really talk about my goals so much in this. I guess I talked about a couple of them. But one thing I didn't mention was that I would like to, I don't have a Twitter account. I don't, I'm not really such a big fan of like social media publicity. I mean, I have a Facebook and LinkedIn, but you know, they're more for just like personal stuff. When it comes to public facing stuff, I prefer to go through sort of established organizations, you know, like writing news articles. I would like to start pitching to organizations like The Atlantic. And so talking about, I'm basically at this point where I want to sort of, I feel like I have enough to say where larger venues might want to pay attention to me. So I'm interested to talking about sort of pitching to those types of institutions specifically.
And you said that you don't have a social media presence and you don't want to try that as an inroad. Is that correct?
I don't want to do something I have to manage to pay attention to who's following me or how many people are following me. I know so many people who just kind of go down a black hole with that stuff. And it's not the sort of thing I have the time or inclination to start managing.
So I'm gonna start off by doing what you might not want me to do, which is to make a plug for one specific use of Twitter in order to meet your specific goals, which is pitching to higher profile publications. Science writers and science journalists and non-science writers and journalists love Twitter. And even if you don't want to be an active participant, you don't want to share your research there, it might not hurt to spend, you know, just an hour a month or a little bit of time getting to know who some of the players are and what they're talking about and what they're interested in. So for example, I mean, I know from my personal circles, but also through Twitter, probably about 5 or 6 different people at The Atlantic who I can reach out to on Twitter at any time. So you can passively use Twitter, for example, as a tool to get to know the landscape for the types of outlets that you are seeking. Beside that, let me give you a couple of other pointers for reaching those high profile. You said that you were at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, is that right?
Carnegie Mellon.
Carnegie Mellon. So one option is you can talk to your press officer. I don't know if you've ever worked with them or know who they are, but you can identify who your public information officer is, and you can talk to them about your goals. You can see if they have personal contacts at The Atlantic or at the specific outlets that you're seeking. One of the most important things, unfortunately, it's just the way of the world, it's personal connections, is it's a lot easier to get a pitch through to a publication if they know who you are. So whether that's you personally or somebody who works at your university who can say, hey, this, you know, Dr. Pessner, he has these amazing ideas about X, Y, and Z, and you should really talk to him. And he has this op-ed that he's already ready to do. Are you guys interested? So
not a doctor yet.
I'm sorry?
Not a doctor yet, but on
sorry. I always defer just in case. But so, you know, yeah, Jeremy has these great ideas. So having that personal connection, that's so try your press office. Twitter's another tool. You can also do cold pitches. So you can go on to whatever publication it is that you're interested in. I highly recommend that you read back, at least in your topic, or do a Google search to go back a few months to see what have they been covering, to make sure that whatever you're pitching is sufficiently different from what they have been covering, and that you can pitch it and frame it as being something that is additive and not redundant to whatever their coverage on that topic is. Then getting back to my slides, what connections are you making? Are you connecting it to a current event? Are you connecting this to something that people are really going to care about? Is there a way that you can frame that? Pitches that you send to a publication, whether it's through their contact form, whether it's through your public information officer, whether it's through Twitter, they should be about a paragraph long. They do not have high attention spans. They're getting hundreds, if not thousands, some of them, pitches every week. I pitch for my profession on behalf of people, and I know people personally, and I can still tell you that my batting average is, I don't know, I'm happy if like for 4 out of 5, they just write back to me and acknowledge that I actually pitched to them. And then if 1 or 2 in 5 I get landed, that's successful for me. And this is something that I've been doing for a long time. So you have to be patient. You can have the best ideas in the world, and it can still take some time to find the right pitch. That was a lot really quickly. Do you have any other follow-ups? And then I'll move on to another question.
Not right now, but I will ask, like, is it possible to maybe follow up with emails afterwards if I come up with more questions?
Yeah, of course.
Wonderful, thank you.
I have a slide at the very end that I'll put up with my information. Who else? And just jump right in. I'm not formal here. Vetri?
Yeah, I was hoping to follow up a bit on the previous question, but kind of in a different way. So I am active on Twitter, but I think that one thing that, you know, I have difficulty with, or I guess I just don't know how to approach this, is like how to build the type of network that you're talking about where you can reach out to journalists, right? Like I don't know, like I would feel like, am I supposed to just write a tweet and tag some Atlantic writer in it? Like,
You
or
can.
okay.
It's not the most effective way, although it can work. So normally, when I'm advising clients who are building from scratch, what I usually advise is you want to have a little bit of content on your site, on your feed first, that kind of shows who you are, what your interests are. It sounds like you might already have that. And then you want to make sure that you're following new people when you have new content to share, if that makes any sense. So like you send out a tweet, and then like if you have in the back of your mind, oh, I wonder if Sarah Zhao at The Atlantic would follow, would be interested in this, and you haven't followed her yet, then go ahead and follow her right after that, because she'll get a little notification that says, Vetri just followed you, and then she'll say, oh, who's that? And then you want that tweet to be, if it's somebody who you're already following and you already have a decent amount of contact, sure, try tagging them. The most important thing with social media is just sort of trying new ways to engage with people. So retweet other people's content, like other people's content. If you see an article by somebody who you like, who you want to connect with, comment on their article, reply to them or comment, and see if you can get engagement that way. It can take some time and practice just to sort of figure that out. I'm a big fan of cold calling and cold pitching, because why not? Like, what do you have to lose? And even if you fail, like you could write back to the exact same person 2 months later and they probably wouldn't even know that it's the same person. Or you can reference back to it. It can serve in your favor. So yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a similar Twitter question.
Yeah.
So my Twitter account I've had since high school, and it's not super professional usually. Like I tweet my friends and we talk about movies or we talk about pop culture. Should I have like a second like professional account, or like wipe this one clean and keep the same like handle?
Let me ask you a question. If you started a second one, would you then be still actively using them both, or would the second one be replaced? Like the first one would be kind of become an archive, and the second one you'd be actively using?
No, I guess I would use them both, but under different scenarios. Like I would still talk to my friends and like keep all of my followers on the first one.
So I'm a big fan of, if you're going to be active, only having one account, but just thinking about ways to be professional. So if there's anything in your current account that you would be like horribly embarrassed for potential funders, collaborators, like anything like that, no judgment from me, but if there's anything like that, then you should either start a new account or scrub out those specific tweets. But I see no reason. I use my account mostly professionally, but like a little bit personally. I tend to manage my own personal Twitter, although I manage like 6 other accounts, so I don't use mine that often, but I tend to use Twitter more professional, and I use Facebook for talking to my friends. That's sort of how I personally keep that balance. But I don't see any reason why you can't have both. And I know many people who successfully do that, who are able to be social and talk to their friends. As long as there's nothing like uncomfortable there, but also balance that out with professional tweets, with sharing the research that matters to you, with talking to collaborators and other professionals. So I don't think that like in and of itself, it's a conflict. Does that help? I know it's not a direct answer.
Yeah, it does help. I was just hoping that maybe I could somehow combine the two and like not turn off potential like editors at journals or like things.
Science is changing. People are much more not just open, but wanting everybody to bring their full selves into their professions. It's not just in science. I think it's everywhere, but I think it's very pronounced in science, because traditionally it's like science is very objective and you're supposed to be this robot and not take a position and blah, blah, and that's all like, no, like, we now are we know that we should bring our whole selves and that it enhances the culture of science and the process of science. And so I think showing that you have a human side is actually a positive thing. Again, assuming that you can sort of toe that line and manage that where there's nothing that's gonna, get you into trouble down the line.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna give like 5 more minutes for questions since you guys have a lot of good questions. Anybody else? Yes, Rachel.
Rachel should go, but I want to go after.
Okay, Rachel and
go
then
ahead.
Carolyn.
Go ahead if you're ready. That's fine.
No, you've tried to speak up for a while, so I don't want to like.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, so I was just gonna sort of add on to that conversation about sort of the line between marketing and communication. So I'm on Twitter, but like marketing makes me queasy and it's really not my thing. And I feel like a lot of the conversation on social media is just like a fight to be heard and who can be loudest. And in my own personal exploration, I feel like that's not really how I want to communicate. And so I don't know if this is really a question, but just like how do you draw that line between just like putting your energy towards marketing and yelling on Twitter versus like being tactful in the way that you communicate? Like personally, I would not like to have a Twitter, but like I do for the communication purposes. So yeah, that's not exactly a question, but just how do you walk that line?
I hear you. Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, and it is a question of strategies. So again, it kind of gets back to your goals. So I'm definitely not somebody who recommends that everybody use Twitter no matter what for their science communication. It's not a fit for some people and for their goals. And even if it is, it shouldn't be just for the sole purpose of being heard or being seen. It should have a strategic purpose. Even if it's just as simple as, connecting with other scientists within your space. So this is sort of a cop-out answer, but I just would encourage you to be really intentional in how you're thinking about using these things, which it sounds like you're already being very thoughtful and intentional with that. But the question is whether there are some aspects of Twitter that you can use strategically to your advantage. So kind of what I was saying to Jeremy and to Vetri, which is that, can you follow people and see what they're saying, like journalists or policymakers or other types of collaborators? And can you then just engage with them when it makes sense for you? If you see something that they've written that you really appreciate or want to comment on or can use as a connecting point. There are many times that I cold email people and I say, I just did this actually for my book a few weeks ago where I say, hey, I saw your tweet about this, and I really want to write about it in my book. Can you talk to me? And then we set up a call for the next day. So it gives you a connection and a conversation point. And I never even had to go. I mean, I went onto Twitter to see that, but I didn't have to engage with that person on Twitter. So there are a lot of ways that you can strategically think. And again, it comes back to my broken record of who you want to reach and what you're trying to accomplish. Carolyn?
Okay, cool. Thanks. This has been really helpful. So I have one thought on the whole Twitter conversation. I've also had my Twitter since high school, and my department chair followed me like a few years ago, and I was like, well, I guess this is my science Twitter now. So I don't know, I just kind of rolled with, like went with it. And the way I kind of look at it is because I still tweet a lot of like opinions, and it's not entirely professional all the time, is like, what are my values and what is important to me and people that I'm going to interact with professionally, whether it be like people who I want to write with or work for. And if they had a problem with something that I thought, I'd kind of want to know that. So that's just like kind of part of where I'm at with my public facing Twitter. But that's just something I thought about a lot when my department chair followed me, because I was like, do I need to just completely make a new one or what? But I do also have a question. I just wanted to throw that out there. So an area of science communication that I feel like I really, really want to get more into is figuring out how to reach marginalized communities who I want to help by giving resources and access to things that a lot of us take for granted. And a lot of the traditional avenues for science communication are more geared towards, I don't know, I guess access to politicians or lawmakers and stuff like that. And so I'm kind of wondering if you found any ways through your work, Lisa, that are really great avenues to just get in touch more with the general public. Obviously, just being in the community is one thing, but I mean, and any other kind of ideas that you have there.
Yeah, we did a lot of work for the Film Picture Scientist and what I'm working on my book about now, in trying to reach more marginalized and underrepresented communities. And we found that it is hard to like directly reach those people, but there are sort of those secondary audiences that I talked about in my slide that you can use to help reach those audiences. And I mean, really, when we're talking about the public, even on Twitter, you're talking about using some secondary audience to get to that public audience. And so there are a lot of really great nonprofits and societies and advocacy groups, depending on what you're working on, including some that have formed through social media. So I would encourage you to identify, and we can talk a little bit more about this later too, some of those specific groups that you're trying to reach, and kind of do some research into what advocacy groups or societies or other groups exist, because it might be that using them as sort of a bridge to get to those audiences could be the best strategy for you in your communication goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. One of my general questions is I feel like like in academia, you're kind of pushed to prioritize the amount of content versus maybe the overall clarity of things. So if you have a lot of different arguments that support the same kind of general theme, I feel like that would be preferred in academia, whereas it seems that it's kind of not necessarily the opposite, but that you would probably try to prioritize clarity, especially if something is for the general public. For something like this pitch, I guess, how many different ideas should you be thinking about to put together?
So I think for the pitch itself, so when you're talking about this 1 to 2 minute pitch, or a 100 to 200 word written sort of thing, it's enough to have 1 to 3 arguments to help support what you're doing. Usually probably less is more. If you can have something that's really compelling for the hook, then once you get it out there and you write an op-ed or you give an interview and you have more space, then usually it's about 3 things that you want to get in for a public audience. Once you start to get much more than that in terms of the number of reasons or arguments or sort of supports for it, it's hard for a non-expert. It's hard for even an expert, quite frankly, but especially for a non-expert to sort of keep their attention. And so I don't think it is the opposite. You still have to have that rich well of knowledge that you have, because eventually you're going to be talking to people and they might ask questions, and then you can give that information to them, but you don't need to give all of that up front. Does that help?
Yes, that makes sense.
Great. Anybody else?
Sort of when you talk about your own experience, so we talked about before about how to be heard, how to get attention, so I guess, being strategic on Twitter is one way, but in terms of, you find that this is sort of thing that becomes easier with a snowballing, you get one thing and people want to talk to you and it gets another, maybe sort of in terms of your own experience and those you've worked with, sort of saying how the best way to capitalize this, not only for this particular project, but in the longer run.
Yes. And, yes and no. There is definitely a snowball effect. So if you have a successful communications, I'll call it a campaign, a successful pitch or something, where you get your work out and you get a lot of attention around it, then certainly being out there, more people will see it and then more people will come to you. And it's, it's sort of like within the academic community, how that works, right? The more that you're cited and the more that you're out there, the more attention you're going to get. And so there is definitely that process, but it can become a one-off or a two-off. So you do have to go out there pretty frequently with your work if communication is a major priority or if your goals require it. So depending on what your goals are, it might not be enough to just get one article in the Atlantic. You would probably need to, follow up. It's good to establish relationships with editors once you have that. It's good to establish these relationships on social media if you decide that you want to be engaged on social media. The communication work never really ends. It never really becomes easy. It's another part of the job, and it's something that you need to make the space and time for that works for your goals and for your, for your life. And so there are multiple different ways that you can do that. And coming up with something that's sort of sustainable and feels good for you might take a little bit of time. Anything else? I know I'm a couple minutes over. It was really great to talk to you guys. Please reach out to me. I think that the folks, I think Nicole and Adriana will probably be following up with you guys because they want to write a blog post about this session. So I would encourage you to work with them on that, to maybe, if you're feeling bold, provide your pitches as some examples that they can use in that. And if you have any other questions or anything comes up, please do reach out. I'd love to always talk to new scientists and to.
Do you have an email on your page? You mentioned.
Yes, I do. So you can just use the contact form on there. Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't put it up there since I knew it was being recorded. So yeah, if you use the contact form, I'll write you guys back and then you'll have my email.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us. Apologies for the sirens.
No worries.
And yeah, we really appreciated having you today. And I hope you all really enjoyed creating your pitches and will be able to use them as you go forward and promote your pieces. As you all know, JSPG is always very busy. So I just want to encourage you all to attend our events when you can. And also, I am going to just drop in the chat our next call to papers, in which we are doing a special issue on STEM workforce and education. And so I think a lot of you have a lot of great ideas that align with that as well. So, we encourage you all to submit. And I actually did not put that in, didn't submit it in the chat, but here it is now, in case you haven't seen it. But yeah, continue to follow us, continue to participate in events, and we hope you really enjoyed this session.